This is my fieldwork reflection for the fieldwork I did at Diamond Bar High School. Now I am in the student teaching class, so I have been at Diamond Bar teaching lessons from February all the way till the end of May, and I have taught all 5 geometry periods. So for this fieldwork reflection, I'm going to focus on period 4. And I'm only going to focus on 5 of the lessons that I did for chapter 11. These lessons focus on circumference and areas of circles. The Diamond Bar High School does have a student population of about 3,000 students at grades 9 through 12. The population is very diverse and multi-ethnic with many different languages spoken. The majority are Asian students, followed by whites, followed by Hispanic, and then African American. And then I have about 2% of students that identify as other or as multiple. Now in terms of the classroom setup, this period 4 has 27 students. The capacity is about 40 students. One of my classes has 39 students. I have them set up into groups, heterogeneous groups that I have carefully picked out with a strong student, a weak student, and 2 middle students. I have 1 autistic student and I have 5 English learners, and those are also paired up with students that they work well together with. They already have made connections with them and they get along really well. They help each other out. So I made sure to take that into consideration as well. Now, like I said, I'm going to focus these reflections on 5 of the lessons that I taught in chapter 11. Chapter 11 focused on circumference, area, and later on into volume. But in the first part of the unit, I just focused on circumference and areas and some applications. Now, in the first lesson, I focused it particularly on vocabulary. Like I said, I have 5 English learners in my class, so I really wanted to make sure that I included a lot of vocabulary, a lot of visuals, a lot of time for them to practice using vocabulary in different ways. So in this lesson, I had a foldable that just reviewed a lot of the circle parts. We had been working with circles before, but I really wanted to focus on the vocabulary that we would use for this section. Now here I have a picture of a Kahoot game that we played. My students love to play Kahoot. They really get a kick out of it. They get very competitive. And this was just a review of the circle parts in connection to real-world objects. So I had them identify circle parts in different objects. Here I have the spoke of a bicycle wheel, considered a radius. This lesson went pretty well. Vocabulary lessons tend to be a little bit more fun, but also challenging because there's a lot of new content for students, a lot of vocabulary and academic language, but because it's very easy to make it interactive. We play games, we have foldables, we have manipulatives, we have a lot of different things that we can use to help us remember all of these terms in different ways. A lot of visuals, a lot of color coding, things like that. For lesson number 2, I focused on circumference and finding arc length. Now, circumference is something that they had done before, so we didn't focus too much time on it. It was more review, and I also focused on arc length. Now, I was able to make the connection between arc length and circumference, that an arc length is just part of a circumference. So I talked about using a pizza crust, right? You have a pizza. The crust is the entire circumference of the pizza, whereas an arc length is just a part of the crust on a slice of pizza. And I think that visual really helped my English learners identify the difference between circumference and arc length, but how they're also related. Here I have a sample of, I use a lot of guided notes so that I can get through a lot of the content and make sure that students have the necessary information. They just fill in as we go along because especially in geometry, there's a lot of visuals, a lot of instructions, so I just want to get through that portion. On lesson number 3, we focused on circumference and arc length applications. In this lesson, I really wanted them to kind of explore applying what they had learned the day before into real-world problems. So I had them, I presented them with a problem, and I said, if I know the diameter of a wheel and I have them pick out a really nice car that they really enjoy and look up, the general dimensions of a wheel. If I know the diameter of a wheel, and let's say a wheel makes 70 or so revolutions, what would be the distance traveled by that wheel? And I had students first think on their own and then be able to discuss with a partner how they would be able to solve that problem. And then I presented them with a Padlet where they shared how they would be able to solve that problem. How would they come up with a strategy and then go ahead and apply that strategy to the specific problem. And here you can see some sample responses. This strategy in particular I really loved because students got to explore beyond the content without my help first. Of course, I used some guided tips and little hints as I walked around the room, listening to their discussions. But they were able to share and really put into writing some strategies that they would use to solve the problems. In the next lesson, we moved on to areas of circles. Now, they have worked with areas before, so I focused more on sectors. And similar to that whole pizza analogy, area is what's contained inside of the circle. So what I would say the actual pizza part, aside from the crust, well, it includes the crust, but I made sure the crust is the circumference, the pizza is what's inside, and then the sector is really just a slice of pizza. And then for this activity, for us to practice the content, I had them do a fan and pick Kagan strategy. So within their teams, I had a bunch of cards. Here's some samples of some of the questions on the cards. And, they would fan them out and pick a problem, read the problem to the student next to them, and the student next to them would answer the question. And the group would either praise or coach, depending on the answers. Like I said before, I really do enjoy using Kagan strategies in the classroom. It really helps my weaker students the most, including my English learners and my autistic student, because they feel a lot more comfortable working together, especially the way that I have carefully picked these groups. They really help each other out. My stronger students are really great resources for me to help explain some of the concepts into simpler terms for my weaker students. And this is just an example of one of the ways that I do that. Finally, my last lesson is an application of areas of circles. Now, I mentioned this in my Google Earth paper that I used. One of the applications for areas of circles are population densities. So I had them find population for Diamond Bar itself, and then I gave them a specific area. The given radius of the city of Diamond Bar, and they had to find the population density. I also had them do that for other cities nearby with some other high schools, and then compare and contrast the populations from Diamond Bar and those of other cities, including the most populated city in Los Angeles County, which is Koreatown. The students really enjoyed comparing the population and just talking and reflecting about why Koreatown would be so heavily populated compared to Diamond Bar, which is a suburb. So we got to discuss some population and some, cultural differences between two different cities, all within the context of finding areas of circles, which is really, really fun to do. So those are my 5 lessons that I focused on for this reflection. Like I said before, what I have really enjoyed working with doing in these classes is more of the collaboration, and then taking applications for what we learn. I try to just focus one day on giving the content, having students practice just the basics, and then the next day we just kind of apply it into something else, into a real-world scenario. I really wanted to focus on real-world scenarios in this student teaching experience. But the Kagan strategies really help me just incorporate collaboration in my classroom. The Kagan strategies also helps me address the differences in skill levels between my weaker students and my more advanced students. They get to discuss a lot more in collaboration with each other and help each other out whenever students don't understand the concept.